I was close enough to hear the leather of his boots when he started to climb, and close enough to know, the second his hand closed on the bronze, that the man with the lights ringed around his head had decided the whole night belonged to him. You have to understand what the night was first, or the climbing means nothing. I had brought my mother to the lantern walk because she had not seen it in 11 years, since before her knees gave her trouble, and she had spoken of it the whole spring as if it were a thing she had only half believed she would live to see again. The lantern walk in our city is not a parade in the way a parade shouts. It is a procession of the smallest kind of fire. On the longest night of the harvest moon, the whole of the old quarter goes dark on purpose. Every shop shutters its electric lamps, every window puts out its own, and the people carry paper lanterns down the Cauldron Mile to the river, where the names of the year's dead are read and a single great lantern is floated out on the black water. It is a quiet thing. It is meant to be quiet. The only sounds are feet and the low reading of the names, and now and then a child asking why we walk so slow. And down the center of that river of small lights walks the guard. I should say which guard, because there is more than one kind in this country, and the loud part of the world only knows the loud kind. The men who stand at the palace gates in the red and the tall black fur are one thing. But the procession on the lantern walk is kept by the watch of the old quarter, a ceremonial company that has kept that single mile since before anyone's grandfather, in the dark green that the old city used before it ever had a king, with the long unstrung horns slung at their backs that they sound only at the river. They do not march, they pace. They carry no lantern of their own, because the old saying is that the watch is the dark that makes the small lights worth carrying, and a man who has spent his whole life learning to be still in the dark does not need a light to find his feet. The man at the head of the procession that night was named, I learned it later, when half the city wanted to learn it, Corporal Ray's Hallam. I did not know it then. Then he was only the tall still shape at the front of the slow river of fire, in the green so dark it was nearly the night itself, pacing the names down toward the water. I will tell you the truth. Before all of it began, I had not looked at him twice. That is the whole point of a man like that. You are not supposed to look at him twice. He is not the show. The names are the show, and the small fires, and the slow walking. And the man in green is only there so that nothing breaks the slow walking, so that the night stays the kind of night it has been for 300 years. The man who broke it had a different theory of the night. I had noticed him a quarter hour before, because you could not help noticing him. He had arranged himself so that you could not. He had come into the lantern walk the way a flashbulb comes into a dark room. He wore a coat that was the color the rest of us were trying not to be, a bright synthetic gold that took every spare scrap of light in the street and threw it back, and around his neck and clipped to his chest, he carried a ring of small lamps, the cold blue-white kind, on a frame that lit his own face from below so that wherever he turned he walked in a little bubble of harsh day. People had begun to mutter at him before he ever touched the monument, because the lights hurt. That is the simple thing nobody had told him. They hurt the eyes of people who had darkened a whole quarter on purpose so that paper and candle could be beautiful. A woman near me had asked him, not unkindly, to dim them. He had turned the little day of his own face on her, smiled, and said, "It's for the content. People want to see." And he had lifted the small, bright camera he carried on a pole above the crowd and spoken into it in the bright, fast voice of a man narrating his own life. "We are live at the famous Lantern Walk, you guys. The energy here is insane." The energy here was the energy of 1,000 people walking slowly in the dark to remember the dead. But I understood, even then, that he was not in the same night we were in. He was in a night made of numbers that climbed on a screen, and the slowness and the dark and the low naming of names were, to him, only a backdrop that was being wasted because no one had thought to climb on top of it. The monument is called the Cauldron Stone, and it stands where the mile bends toward the river, and the procession parts around it and comes together again on the far side the way water goes around a rock. It is an old thing, a bronze figure of a woman holding a covered lamp, set on a tall plinth of dark stone, worn smooth by 300 years of hands laid on it in passing. People touch the foot of it as they walk by and say a name. That is all it is for. That night the bronze woman was wet from the river damp, and shining a little in the small lights, and the people were touching her foot and saying their names, and the man in gold decided she would make a better stage than a shrine. He climbed her. He did it fast, the way a man does a thing he knows he will be stopped from doing if he is slow. He set a foot on the worn bronze foot that the whole city touches, and a hand on the lamp the bronze woman carries, and he went up the figure like a ladder, and at the top he braced one boot on her shoulder and one on her covered lamp and turned the cold, bright lights of his rig out over the crowd and lifted the camera on its pole and shouted in that voice, over the low reading of the names, "Okay, we are going up, you guys. This is the shot." And the slow river of small lights stopped. I felt my mother's hand tighten on my arm. Up and down the mile the low reading of the names faltered, because the reader, an old man at the river end with a lamp and a long list, could hear the shouting and could not see the cause, and the people near the stone had stopped walking and were looking up at the bright gold figure standing on the shoulder of the bronze woman with his rig of cold lights washing all the warm small ones to nothing. Somebody said, "Get him down." Somebody said it louder. A man near me started toward the plinth, and his wife caught his sleeve, because the man in gold was 12 feet up on slick bronze, and any push could put him on the stones. And the tall still shape in dark green, at the head of the stopped procession, turned. He did not run. I want to be very exact about this, because everything that came after turns on it, and because the loud part of the world that watched it later kept trying to make it into the other kind of story. He did not run. He did not shout. He did not unsling the long horn at his back or reach for anything at his belt. He simply stopped being the front of the procession and became a man walking back through it, and the people parted for him the way they had parted for the stone, and he came to the foot of the monument and stood at the bronze woman's worn foot and looked up at the man on her shoulder, and he said one word, in a voice that did not rise at all, and yet reached me 30 feet away across a silent crowd. He said, "Down." That is all. Not "get down," not "you can't be up there," not "do you know what this is." Just the one word level, the way you would set a stone on a table, and in the silence after it I understood the thing about the watch that I had walked past my whole life without understanding, that the stillness is not nothing. The stillness is a held thing. He had been still at the front of that procession the way a dam is still. And the man on the shoulder of the bronze woman had just put his weight against the dam, and the dam had not moved, and now it had spoken one word, and the word had the whole weight of the still thing behind it. The man in gold laughed. He laughed down at the guard and turned the camera toward him and said, in the bright voice, for the screen, "Oh, okay, we've got a guard, you guys. We've got the famous guard, say hi to the guard." And he reached down with one hand as if he would pat the top of the dark green cap, and the crowd made a sound, a low, ugly sound, the sound a crowd makes when it has decided about a man. And Hallam did not move. He stood at the foot of the stone with his face turned up, and he said again the same level word, "Down." And then, because the man laughed again, he added the only other words he was to say for a long time, "You are standing on a grave." I did not know what he meant. The crowd around me did. There was a stir, a turning of faces, and the woman beside me put her hand over her mouth, and my mother said very low, "Oh, the names." And I understood. The Calderon stone is not only a monument. The names that are read at the river are read because there is no other place to read them. The city of 300 years ago that first walked this mile in the dark was a city that had just buried a great many of its people, and the bronze woman with her covered lamp stands over the place where the unnamed of that year were laid when there was no room left to lay them with names. The whole lantern walk, the dark quarter, the small fires, the slow pace, the low reading, all of it grows out of that one piece of ground. and a man in a gold coat was standing on the shoulder of the figure that marked it, with cold lights, shouting for a screen. "This is the shot." "It's a statue, man," the man in gold said, and he laughed once more, and he turned away to find his shot. And here is where the night could have gone the other way, and where I have thought, many times since, about what it costs a man to be the damn. Because the man in gold, turning with his rig of lights and his camera on its pole, his attention all on the screen and none on his feet, put his weight on the bronze woman's covered lamp, which is smooth and which was wet, and his boot went out from under him. I saw it the way you see a thing you will see again for years. The bright gold figure 12 feet up on the slick bronze, his arms going wide, the camera pole swinging out over the heads of the crowd, his face for the first time all night not arranged for any screen. Just a man's face, an ordinary frightened man's face, falling backward off a statue onto a street full of his own people and the stones of a grave. The crowd below him scattered. Of course it did. You cannot stand under a falling man, and in the half-second of that scattering there was one shape that did not scatter, that went the wrong way, that went toward the falling man and not away, and it was the dark green one. Hallam did not catch him. I want to be honest, because the loud part of the world later said he caught him, and that is not what happened, and it is a smaller and a better thing than catching him. A man cannot catch a falling man from 12 feet. He can only break him on the stones a little less hard, and pay for it with his own body. Hallam stepped under him and turned his shoulder up and took the falling weight of him across that turned shoulder, and the two of them went down together onto the worn bronze foot of the stone, onto the place the whole city touches, and the cold lights of the rig smashed out, and for one instant the mile was as dark as it was meant to be, dark all the way to the river, 1,000 small paper fires and nothing else. Then someone lifted a lantern, and another, and in the warm climbing light I saw the guard get up. He got up slowly on one arm, with the man in gold lying half across him gasping like a landed fish, alive, whole, frightened out of his bright voice and into no voice at all. And the guard's other arm, his right, the shoulder he had turned up to take the weight, hung wrong. Anyone could see it hung wrong. He had put his own body between a fool and the stones had taken their price out of his arm. And the first thing he did, before anything with that one good arm, was reach down and take the man in gold by the front of his coat and set him sitting upright against the plinth, the way you would set up a child who has fallen, and look him in the face close in the warm small light, and say, I was near enough now to hear it, everyone near was near enough, the whole mile had gone so quiet, he said. You're all right. Don't move yet. You're all right. To the man who had stood on the grave for a screen, you're all right. I have turned that over more times than I can count. I had spent the whole quarter hour hating the man in gold, the way the crowd hated him, the clean, easy hating of a man who deserves it. And the guard, whose arm the man had just broken by his own foolishness, the guard who had every reason and every right, used the first words out of his mouth to tell the fool he was all right. I did not understand it that night. I think I understand it a little now. A man who has truly given his whole life to keeping a thing does not, in the moment of the breaking, suddenly start keeping a grudge instead. He keeps the thing. The thing he keeps is people walking safe down a dark mile. The man in gold was one of the people. That the man was a fool did not move him out of the keeping. It is a hard kind of honor, the kind that does not get to choose who it is honorable to. The man in gold did not understand it either. That came later too. What he did in that first minute was the thing I have least forgiven and have come slowly to understand the most. He sat up against the plinth, with the guard's broken arm hanging beside him and the guard's good hand steadying his shoulder, and the 1,000 small lights coming back up the mile, and the first thing he did, before he was even fully upright, before the fright had left his face, was look for his camera. It had not broken. It had swung out on its pole over the crowd, and a man had caught it by instinct, the way you catch any falling thing, and the man was standing there holding it, not knowing what to do with it, and the little red light on it was still on. It had recorded all of it. And the man in gold, sitting on the grave with a broken-armed guard holding him steady, saw the little red light, and I watched the bright, fast voice try to come back into his face. I watched him think the screen thought even then. I watched him understand, in some quick low part of himself, that he had just been handed the most viewed minute of his life. He started to reach for it. And the guard let go of his shoulder, just took the good hand away, did not strike it down, did not seize the camera, did not say a word about it, simply took his steadying hand off the man and let him be a man who reaches for a camera while sitting on a grave with the body that broke his fall hanging wrong beside him. And there was something in the taking away of that hand worse than any blow. The man in gold felt it. His reach stopped. He looked at the guard, and the guard looked back at him, level, the damn look, and did not say anything at all, and the man in gold's bright face came apart a little, and he put his hand down without the camera in it. That was the first humbling. It was very quiet. Most of the crowd did not even see it. But I saw it, and I think the man in gold knew in that quarter second exactly what had happened to him, that a man with a broken arm had measured him in one look and found the exact size of him, and that the size was small, and that the guard had not even bothered to say so. Then the rest of it came fast, the way these things do once they start. 2 more of the watch came back through the procession. The slow river had stopped entirely now, the names unread, the lanterns held, and behind them came a woman in the dark green with a silver cord at her shoulder, the sergeant of the watch, a square gray woman who had clearly kept that mile for 30 years, and intended to keep it that night too. She came to the stone, and she took in the whole of it in one sweep, the broken-armed corporal on one knee, the man in gold against the plinth, the smashed rig, the worn bronze foot, the held lanterns, and she did the thing I have thought about almost as much as the guard's 3 words. She did not rush. The whole mile was stopped, and 1,000 people were waiting, and she did not rush. She knelt by Hallam first, before she did anything about the man in gold, and she looked at the arm, and she put 2 fingers very lightly on his shoulder, and she asked him something low, and he answered her low, and she nodded once. She tended her own man first. Then she stood and turned to the man in gold, and the knight turned with her. "You climbed the stone," she said. Not a question. The level voice ran in the family of that company. They were all built out of the same stillness. The man in gold had found a piece of his voice. "I didn't know it was, look, it's a statue. I didn't know it was a—" "You were told," the sergeant said. "He told you what it was." "You laughed." "He's fine," the man in gold said, and his voice climbed, looking for the place it always lived, the place where words were a thing you arranged until you got the result you wanted. "Everybody's fine, right? Nobody's hurt." And even as he said it, his eyes went to the corporal's hanging arm and away again fast, because some part of him could not afford to look at it. It's actually kind of an amazing moment. Honestly, the guard catching me, that's a beautiful thing, that's a story. People are going to. "Stop talking," the sergeant said. It was not loud. I have heard men shout in my life, and none of them ever stopped a crowd the way that 2-word quiet stopped the man in gold. He stopped talking. And in the stopping, in the silence of 1,000 people on a dark mile, with the names unread at the river and a guard kneeling broken at his side, the man in gold finally, for the first time all night, heard where he was. You could see it land on him. You could see the night reach him at last, the dark on purpose, the small fires, the slow walking, the low naming, the worn bronze foot under 300 years of hands, the grave he had been standing on for the shot. It all came into his face at once, the way cold water comes into a man, and the bright gold of him, the lights of him, the voice of him, all of it seemed suddenly to be the most foolish thing a man could have brought into a place like this. He was not arranged for any screen now. He was just a man on a grave who had finally understood whose grave it was, with the body that broke his fall beside him, and a city all around him in the dark that had darkened itself for sorrow, and that he had tried to make bright for numbers. "I'm sorry," he said. And it was a small sound, and it was the first true thing he had said all night, and the sergeant of the watch heard it for what it was. I will give her that. She heard it, but she did not let it do what he wanted it to do, which was to be enough. "You'll say that to the magistrate," she said, "and to him." She did not point at Hallam, she did not have to. "What you'll say to me is this. You'll sit there, and you won't touch that camera, and you won't say one more word until the constables come, and you will give my city back its night." Then she turned from him entirely, as if he had already become a small settled thing, a piece of business to be handed off, and she lifted her face to the stopped procession and the held lanterns, and she did the thing that I think the whole long night had been waiting for without knowing it. She did not start the names again. Not yet. First she reached out with one square hand and laid it on the worn bronze foot of the cauldron stone, the way the whole city does in passing, and she said a name. I could not hear which name. Her own dead, I think. Everyone in that company carries names. And then she stepped back into her place at the front of the procession where the broken-armed corporal could not stand, and she took up the pace he had been keeping, and down at the river the old man with the lamp and the long list, who had been waiting in the dark not knowing what had stopped his night, heard the slow feet start again, and lifted his list, and began once more to read the names of the years dead into the black water. And the small fires moved again down the dark mile to the river. I want to tell you about the rest of it, because the rest of it is the part the loud world got wrong, and the part my mother and I talked about all the way home and many evenings after, and the part that I think is the real story under the story. The constables came. They were quiet about it because the watch is quiet and the constables of the old quarter take their manner from the watch. They did not put the man in gold in irons in front of the crowd. There was no scene. No shoving, no shot for anyone's screen. Two of them stood him up gently from the grave and walked him out of the procession the way you walk out a man who has fainted, and the camera on its pole was taken, and the rig, and the man went out of the lantern walk much more quietly than he had come into it, in the dark, with no light on his face at all. And the medics came for Hallam, and he would not go until the procession had passed. That is the thing I saw last and have kept longest. They brought a chair for him, and he would not sit in it. He stood at the edge of the stone, out of the way, with his right arm bound now across his chest, and his face gray with the pain of it that he would not show. And he stood at attention as well as a man can with one arm bound, and he let the procession he could no longer lead pass him by. The whole slow river of small fires went down the mile past the broken guard standing at the foot of the grave, and every person who passed, I watched them. Everyone laid a hand on the worn bronze foot and said a name, and looked, as they straightened, at the man in dark green standing his last few minutes of the post he had paid for in the bone of his arm. Some of them said something to him. Most of them said nothing, because the night was not for talking, but they looked. They looked at him the way you look at a thing you have decided about, and the thing they had decided was the opposite of the thing the crowd had nearly decided an hour before, and he took the looking the way he had taken the man in gold's laughing, without moving, without changing his face, as if it were all weather and his only work was to stand in it. My mother laid her hand on the bronze foot and said my father's name, who had died the winter before. And then, before I could stop her, she did a thing I had never seen her do. She reached out, my mother, who is shy of all uniforms, and she laid her hand for 1 second very lightly on the corporal's good arm, the way she had laid it on the bronze, and she said, "Thank you for keeping it." Just that. And the corporal, who had not turned his head for the man in gold's hand reaching for his cap, turned his head for my mother and looked down at her, and something moved in his still face, just for a moment, and he said, very low, "It's the post, ma'am. It keeps itself. I only stand it." I have thought about that line for a long time. It keeps itself. I only stand it. I think it is the whole of what a man like that believes and the whole of what makes him able to do what he does. He does not think the night is beautiful because of him. He thinks the night is beautiful, and that his only work is to be the dark and the stillness at the edge of it so that nothing breaks the small fires. He does not need to be seen doing it. Being unseen is, I think, almost the point, the same way the dark quarter is the point, the dark that the small lights are worth carrying against. A man in a gold coat with lights on his own face could never have understood it, because everything in him was arranged to be seen, and the night was arranged to be dark, and the two could not exist in the same place, and one of them had to give. The night did not give. The night never gives. That is what the man in gold learned 12 feet up on a wet bronze shoulder, and it is the oldest lesson the old quarter has to teach, and it has been teaching it for 300 years to anyone who thinks a grave is a stage. The river end of it I will tell quickly, because it is the quiet part, and the quiet part is mine and my mother's and the city's, and does not belong to any screen. At the river the names ended, as they always end, and the great lantern was floated out, a tall paper thing the height of a man, made new each year by the river guild, carrying inside it a single candle for all the years dead together. And the whole city stood on the dark bank and watched it go out onto the black water and grow small. The watch sounded the long horns then, the only time they ever sound them, one low note held by the whole company together, the note that means the night is kept, and the dead are remembered, and the city may go home. And Corporal Hallam, who could not raise a horn with one arm bound across his chest, stood with the company at the river's edge and did not sound, and the sergeant of the watch put him at the center of the line anyway, in the place of honor, where the man who has kept the post stands, and the company sounded the note around him, for him, so that the man who could not raise the horn was none the less the center of the sound. I did not know then that they meant it as honor. I learned it later when I asked an old man of the quarter what it meant, the broken one at the center. He looked at me as if I had asked why the river was wet. He stood between a fool and the grave, he said. Where else would you put him but the center? The loud world found it the next morning, of course. The camera's minute went out into the bright, fast country where the man in gold had lived, and for a few days it was everywhere. And for a few days the loud world tried to make it into the story it always makes, the story of the guard who taught the fool a lesson, the karma story, the spitting out teeth story, the watch this story, and it could not quite, because there was no blow in it anywhere, and the loud world does not know what to do with a story that has no blow. The guard never struck him. The guard told him he was all right. The hardest thing the guard did all night was take his steadying hand away, and the loud world could not even see that. It kept circling the moment of the fall, the catch that was not a catch, looking for the violence, and there wasn't any. And so the story would not quite catch fire the way the man in gold had spent his whole life learning to make stories catch. What caught instead slowly over weeks in the quieter country under the loud one was the 3 words, "You are standing on a grave." People began to write it under things. People began to say it to each other when someone they knew turned a solemn thing into a shot, a wedding into content, a funeral into a feed. You are standing on a grave. It became a small saying. I have heard my own daughter use it, who was not born when it happened, and she does not know it came from a dark mile and a broken arm and a man in green who only ever wanted not to be looked at. I have never told her. I think he would rather she not know. I think being the place a saying comes from, unseen, unnamed, is exactly the kind of monument a man like that would choose, if he had to be one at all, a monument with no face on it, a covered lamp. The man in gold was charged. I went to the hearing because my mother wanted to know, and because I had been near enough to be asked what I saw, and I told them what I saw, which was a man climb a grave for a shot, and a guard break his arm keeping the man off the stones. The charges were the small true ones, the climbing, the damage to the stone, the breaking of a protected procession, the harm that came to a man of the watch, and the magistrate, who was an old woman of the quarter, gave him the sentence the quarter would give. Not prison, which would have been a kind of fame, but work. A season of it. He was to spend the season of his sentence in the dark with the river guild, learning to make the paper lanterns by hand, the small ones the city carries, gluing the frames and trimming the wicks and being unseen, with no light on his face, making the very small fires he had tried to drown in his cold, bright ones. I do not know if it changed him. The quarter does not ask whether a sentence changes a man. It asks only that the man do the work, and that the work be the kind that teaches if the man is teachable. But I will tell you the one thing I know. The next year, on the longest night, I brought my mother to the lantern walk again, and we walked the dark mile down to the river behind the small fires, and the watch paced the names down the center in the dark green, and at the bend of the mile the cauldron stone stood wet and shining a little, the bronze woman with her covered lamp, the worn foot under the New Year's hands. And Corporal Hallam was at the front of the procession again, his arm healed, pacing the slow river of fire, still, unseen, the dark at the edge of the small lights. I do not know if he saw us. You are not supposed to be seen by a man like that. He is busy being the thing that lets you walk safe in the dark. But I laid my hand on the worn bronze foot as I passed, and I said my father's name. And then, very low, so low I am not sure even my mother heard, I said 3 more words to the cold bronze and the dark mile, and the still man in green I could not be sure was listening. I said, "Thank you, kept." And I walked on with the small fires down to the black water, where the names of another year's dead were waiting to be read, in the dark, the way they have been read for 300 years, by a city that knows the difference between a thing you stand on and a thing you stand for, kept by men in green who will never be looked at twice, and who would not have it any other way. I never saw the man in gold again. I am told he does not make his bright loud things anymore, or if he does them somewhere far from here, where no one knows him as the man who stood on the grave. I am told, too, and this is the part I most want to be true, and most cannot prove, that on the longest night of that next year, when the great lantern went out onto the black water, and the watch sounded the one-held note around the healed corporal at the center of the line, there was a man at the back of the dark crowd on the river bank, a man with no light on his face, holding a single small paper lantern of the cheapest kind. The kind he had learned to make with his own hands in the dark of a seasoned sentence, watching the great fire go small on the water with the rest of the silent city. I cannot prove he was there. I would like him to have been. But it does not finally matter whether he was, and I think the corporal would say the same in the level voice, the damn voice, the voice that set one word down like a stone on a dark night and stopped 1,000 people in their tracks. It does not matter who is watching. It never mattered who was watching. The night is kept because it is worth keeping, and the small fires are carried because the dead are worth remembering, and the man in green stands between the fool and the grave because that is the post, and the post keeps itself, and he only stands it, and a city that has someone willing to stand it, unseen, unthanked, with a broken arm if it comes to that, telling even the fool he is all right as he lifts him up off the stones, is a city that has not yet forgotten the difference, and may carry its small lights down the dark a while longer yet. We carried ours, we carry them still. And every year at the bend of the mile I lay my hand on the worn bronze foot and say my father's name, and then I say the other thing, the small thing, the kept thing, to the man in green I am not supposed to see. "Thank you, kept." It is enough. He would tell you it is more than enough. He would tell you in the level voice that he never needed to be thanked at all, that the night does the keeping, and the names do the remembering, and the small fires do the shining, and his whole life's work is only to be the patch of dark at the edge of all that light, steady, unbroken, so that nothing, no fool, no flashbulb, no cold bright rig, no man who mistakes a grave for a stage, ever puts out a single one of the small true fires the people carry in the dark toward the river, toward their dead, toward the morning that always, always comes.